Why don't we get going? Thank you, everybody, for being here. My name is Michael Waterstone. I want to welcome you to the 8th installment of our Dean's Distinguished Speaker Series. And today, our speaker, who I will introduce in a moment, is George Fathery, and we're going to talk about how he helped to preserve an African-American legacy. What a great group of people. Looking through our participants list, I love moments like this where we gather together our faculty, our staff, students, alumni, admitted students. So it is wonderful for you all to be with us today. I realize that for pretty much everybody, this is not your first, second, third, or necessarily even fourth Zoom session of the day. So we're really grateful that you made time to join us for this important conversation. So this month in February, we've been celebrating Black History Month with a variety of programming, including our MLK Jr. keynote discussion featuring civil rights leader Debo Adegible, commissioner on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, partner at Wilmer Hale, chairing the firm's anti-discrimination practice, a race and law colloquium featuring Loyola Law School professor Priscilla Ochin and Kimberly Crenshaw, co-authors of Black Girls Matter, Pushed Out, Over-Policed, and Underprotected. And of course, today's event featuring alum George Fathery, who's going to share an incredible and very personal account of preserving some of the most important and iconic images in Black American history, using a few of the skills he picked up here at Loyola Law School. Before I introduce George, I certainly wanted to take a minute and express my gratitude to our entire community, students, faculty, staff, alumni, for our ongoing and really reflective efforts as we remain committed to the values of anti-racism, equity, and inclusion. And I'm so grateful to the leadership of our Black Law Student Association and the dialogue that we've created, which is available on our website, and I encourage everyone to read. I'm really just incredibly proud of our community, and certainly while we have work to do, grateful for the steps that we are all taking, and consider myself lucky to lead our law school during this historic time of both activism and action. I also consider myself lucky to get to introduce today's speaker, our guest, George Fathery. So let me tell you a little bit about George Fathery, class of 2007. George is a partner in the real estate group at Munger, Olson, and a member of our law school board of directors. George is also the co-chair of the Black Alumni Committee, which works with the Black Law Students Association. George also teaches at our school, teaching a fantastic class called Real Estate Transactions Practicum, using actual redacted contracts from real estate deals he's worked on. Before that, I believe he taught education law. George and his wife, Azita, are involved with the Coelho Center for Disability Law, Policy, and Innovation, and have generously endowed a scholarship at Loyola. And I guess I'll just say, putting aside the formal biography, George is someone that I feel lucky and grateful to call a friend. Julie and I, my wife and I, have had the opportunity to break bread and share times with he and his wife, and he's just someone who I look up to a great deal, never get to hang out with enough, but when I do, always leave feeling better for the experience. So George, just thank you for all that you and Azita do for our community. You guys are beautiful people. So today, George is going to share with us the strategy to acquire the Ebony and Jet photography archive out of a bankruptcy auction in just 72 hours. The legal matters that came into play and what this transaction meant to him personally. So George, I'm going to turn myself off and gratefully turn it over to you. The way this will go is George is going to talk for about 30 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A function. Questions can be submitted via the Q&A tab, and I'll come back in and moderate questions once George is finished with his presentation. So George, to you, and thank you, my friend.
Michael, thanks so much. Thanks so much. I'm super fired up to have the opportunity to talk about this transaction that was so important to me. And especially the opportunity to do it with my Loyola family, which is near and dear to my heart, and during Black History Month. So it's a perfect mix for me. I'm gonna jump in. We've got about a half hour, and then we can save some time for Q&A. But I'm gonna jump in to tell you about this transaction that I had the extreme privilege to work on behalf of the J. Paul Getty Trust and several other charitable institutions 2 years ago. It's a visual story. This is about photography and it's about images. So I've actually prepared a number of slides that I'd like to share. So I'm going to try to share my screen. And so here we go. This handsome gentleman is John Harold Johnson. He is the founder and was for many years, many decades actually, the CEO of Johnson Publishing Company, Inc. Let me tell you a little bit about Mr. Johnson. In 1942, he worked as an office clerk for a life insurance company in Chicago. It's the Supreme Life Insurance Company of America. He asked his mother for $500, which she got by, she borrowed the money and she put up some furniture, some family furniture that they had as security for a $500 loan. She gave her son the $500 that she had borrowed. And with this money, I mentioned he worked for this life insurance company. So he had access to customer lists, and the customer list had demographic information, where people lived, what race they were. With this $500 he got from his mother, he did a mass mailing, and he mailed these subscription cards. And what it said is, if you send back $2, you're going to get an annual subscription to a new magazine called Negro Digest. The magazine did not exist at that time. He was hoping to get enough $2 subscription cards back that he would be able to actually go out then and start and publish a magazine. Good news for Mr. Johnson. He received over 3,000 completed subscription offers. And with that money, he printed his first publication, Negro Digest, which came out in November of 1942. By the next year, Negro Digest had published 500,000, had a subscription of 500,000 copies. Shortly after that, in 1945, Mr. Johnson launched Ebony Magazine, which became the company's really flagship publication. Ebony Magazine was published and designed to look and feel like People Magazine, but People Magazine with one crucial distinction, and it was People Magazine for Black people. He also, 6 years later, in 1951, launched Jet Magazine, and Jet Magazine, it had a smaller kind of format, and it was really meant to kind of look and feel like a Reader's Digest. With the launch of those two titles, Johnson Publishing Company became a force in the business world, in the media world, and in the publishing space. Here in the upper left-hand corner, you see its initial headquarters. A fascinating story. This was the only Black-owned skyscraper in the city of Chicago. There were actually racial housing covenants that prohibited real property in this part of the city from being sold to African Americans. So Mr. Johnson got a buddy of his who was white to pretend like he was going to be the buyer, and Johnson acquired the property to build this building. It's the only Black designed skyscraper in the United States to this day. These are some other images of the Johnson Publishing Company offices and kind of reception and headquarters. Within just a decade, it was employing over 300 professionals in the city of Chicago. He became the first, and really kind of became the first Black-owned media publication. For those who, who don't who didn't grow up with Ebony Magazine, let me say a minute about how significant this publication was. I remember at some point growing up when I was a boy, we lived with my grandmother. She did not have a subscription, but she worked at a place where a woman, one of her colleagues, had a subscription. And I remember when her colleague was done reading it, she would give the magazine to my grandmother, and she would bring it home. And look, you got to remember, like in the late 1940s and 1950s, even the 60s and 70s, Black people in America did not have access to Black media where they could see themselves, where they could see people who look like them, where they could read stories about people who share their experiences. And it really wasn't until Ebony Magazine that Black people in America had a medium that helped them, that showed their faces, that told their stories, and helped them, help not just show, give them a medium and access to read stories about people that look like them, but frankly also to introduce them to the rest of the country. I think it's impossible to overstate the significance that Ebony and Jet Magazine had and how important it was in terms of leading the way to some of the progress that followed that in the decades. And obviously they were magazines, and so they had stories. What we're talking about today, though, is something very special, and those are the photographs. And really, through the 8 decades that the magazine was published, the photographers really did capture some of the most iconic moments in Black American history, which frankly, right, those are iconic moments of just American history. And so you see throughout the 1950s, you see the images that the photographers captured in the 1960s, including this one in the lower right at Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s funeral, iconic image of his widow. Throughout the 1970s, again, just really, kind of captured what was going on, not just in Black culture, but in American culture. And really, coming all the way into the 2000s, the photographs that were captured and that appeared in these magazines kind of told our stories. One of my favorite parts of Ebony Magazine was actually, like, you flip like 3 or 4 pages in, and there's a section, it's called Speaking of People. And this section, it's not celebrities or athletes or political leaders or entertainers. It's everyday Black business people, everyday Black professionals. It's got, this publishing firm operation manager, this person who's a manager at the Indiana airport, a money management consultant. I love this, and I think this is important because a lot of the places in the country in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, you wouldn't know that Black people held professional jobs, right? Unless you were in DC, New York City, Chicago, and maybe Los Angeles. If you were in a lot of parts of the country, you just didn't see Black people holding these types of positions. And so it was always my favorite part of the magazine, just to see these little, it's like 4 or 5 sentences, but it's talking about somebody who's successful and has got a career that you may not know about. Over the decades, Ebony and Jet Magazine covered all aspects of Black life, Black political life, social life, cultural life. I also want to talk about Johnson published these two flagship magazines. He was a very brilliant businessman. He did something else that I loved, kind of early on, and that is, I think he was having problems selling ad space in the magazines. I think that, like, some of the traditional, maybe, white advertisers weren't comfortable with a big marketing spend in these Black magazines. And so Johnson started a cosmetics company called Fashion Fair. He said it's a whole new business, and it's basically perfumes and lotions and facial products, Fashion Fair Cosmetics. And he started it because he had ad inventory in the magazines. And he said, look, if I'm going to, do discounted advertising in my magazines, let me advertise my own products. So he and his wife came up with this cosmetics company, and they used the magazine excess inventory to market and sell. And Fashion Fair became like a major cosmetics brand. So it just kind of shows his brilliance as a business person and as an entrepreneur. Unfortunately, as traditional media faced pressure from the internet, the magazines came under some financial strain. And what you saw kind of in the late 90s and early 2000s is that the magazines and Johnson Publishing Company began to struggle financially. And I think a lot of folks, talk about, the pressure that all print media was under at this time. And I think that's certainly true. But there's an additional pressure that the magazines were facing and the company was facing, in addition to just the shift to internet and online media. And that's this. It's shown on this slide. As you get into the late 90s and early 2000s, what you see is that Ebony and Jet Magazine are no longer the exclusive source to show Black images, to tell Black stories. You look at like the leading magazines in the country and really the world are seeing the value and the worth in sharing our stories and our images. And I think, to be honest with you, it reminds me a lot of, the Negro baseball leagues, right? Like you had segregated baseball leagues, and which from a democratic and a social and a civil rights perspective is obviously very problematic. From an economic perspective, though, the Negro Baseball League teams, those stadiums were Black owned, the concessions were Black owned, the teams were Black owned and run. And, when you've got Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier and integrating Major League Baseball, that's a tremendous accomplishment, again, from a democratic, from a social, from a civic perspective. It also, frankly, contributed to the demise, right, of the kind of the economic demise of the Negro Baseball League. And I think in a similar way, where you see, kind of all of the mainstream magazines catching on to telling Black stories, sharing Black images, I think it did contribute to pressure for Johnson Publishing Company. So what that led to is in 2019, the company filed for bankruptcy. At this point, it had spun off the two major magazine titles, and the key asset that really the key asset of value that remained at the company was the photography archive. So these are all of the images going back to 1942. These are all of the images that the photographers had captured. And just to give you a sense of kind of what's in these archives, here's some of the images that that were captured, and to give you a sense of the scale and the volume, it's over 2,000 bankers boxes. You've got 150,000 contact sheets, almost 800,000 slides, almost 1 million prints, and then over 2.5 million negatives, for a total of over 4.5 million images. Now, mind you, only about less than 1 million of these have ever really been seen publicly, right? Only about 1 million actually ran in the magazines and were published. So you've got 4.5 million images documenting Black history over the past 8 or 9 decades, 3.5 million of which have really never been seen by the public. So that was kind of the key asset that the company held, was this photography archive. And the big question was, what's going to happen? What's going to happen with these photographs? And I'll tell you that, when we got involved, there were a couple of theories of who would be maybe interested in this. I think one theory was, it could be either a private equity firm or like an advertising media company that's going to sort through the images. They'll probably grab the 500 or so, or 500,000 or so kind of most iconic and most significant that you could use to sell goods and services and products. But it would be uncertain as to what would happen to the rest of the collection, right? For 4.5 million images, it's actually quite expensive to preserve and maintain. It's got to be climate controlled, and temperature and security. So, but that was kind of one theory. I had heard rumors, I don't know the veracity of them, but I had heard rumors that there were, kind of white supremacist groups that wanted to get the collection so that they could destroy it and erase kind of Black history. I don't know if that was true or not. One of the leading theories was that this handsome couple would acquire the photography archive. This is George Lucas and his wife, Melody Hobson. They had actually, one of their businesses had actually lent money to Johnson Publishing Company, and that loan was secured by the photography archive. And so, as you all know, just up the street from the law school, they are building the Lucas Museum. And the thought was, hey, maybe he's going to acquire the photography collection and show it in the Lucas Museum. So that's the situation. That's a little bit of history about the company, and then what led to the bankruptcy. And so then fast forward to summer of 2019, I get this email from one of my partners. And it's two sentences. It says, there's an interesting acquisition of Ebony and Jet Magazine archives at a bankruptcy for the Getty, the J. Paul Getty Trust, who's a client of our firm. Do you guys have some time to talk with me and tomorrow with the GC of the Getty? So we schedule a call. It's two of my partners and I. We have a call with the general counsel of the Getty, and he describes that the Getty and potentially some other foundations are very interested in acquiring the photography archive, and their goal is to really to make sure it's preserved, and it's and they want to make it available, digitize it, and make it available for people to use and study. So we have a conversation. And we get the representation. And the first thing we do is my bankruptcy partner reaches out to the bankruptcy trustee who was coordinating the auction. And he says, listen, we represent the Getty. They're interested in being involved in this auction process that we understand is going on. We just got retained. We're going to need a little time to get up to speed. And so we'd like to let you know we'd like to participate and see when the auction is. The bankruptcy trustee said, this was over the weekend, bankruptcy trustee said, the auction resumes Monday at noon. And he said, well, look, we need to get up to speed. And so can you postpone the auction, a couple of weeks so that we can register and do our diligence and then come and participate? And the bankruptcy trustee says, I can postpone the auction until Wednesday. So you've got, this was Sunday that he was on the phone. We had till Wednesday. So we quickly started to get our arms around what we needed to do. And of course, there were these, kind of key legal issues. We're in bankruptcy. There were issues related to title and the intellectual property rights of, making sure that Johnson Publishing Company and the trustee had good ownership to these 4.5 million images. There were some other parties that were claimants in the process who said that they had an interest in the archive. There were tax considerations. So a bunch of legal issues. And then aside from the legal issues, just logistical issues, right? About how we're going to get admitted to the auction, conduct our diligence, develop a bidding strategy, win the auction, negotiate a sale agreement, negotiate with the other claimants, finalize a sale order, go to the hearing, get all the conveyance documents and close. And as I mentioned, we had really 72 hours to do this. So we got to work, right away. I actually flew to Chicago where the auction was being held on. So flew to Chicago first thing Tuesday morning. The work initially was around, really understanding the sale, understanding some of the title issues, understanding who the claimants were, and then, and again, we had 3 days. After the first day, we got some exciting news, but complicating news. We got some exciting news, and that was in addition to the J. Paul Getty Trust, who we were representing directly, there were a number of other foundations and charitable institutions. In fact, what I consider to be some of the top charitable institutions in the country who were very interested in partnering with the Getty and coming together as a consortium, forming a consortium to acquire this archive together. These institutions had never come together to partner for anything like this. To my knowledge, there's not examples of foundations getting together to buy artistic assets out of bankruptcy. So we were really kind of in uncharted territory. It was very exciting kind of what it meant for these organizations to be committed to this. I'll also tell you candidly that from a deal execution perspective, it added some non-trivial complexity in terms of getting this deal done under already fairly demanding circumstances, because not only did we have to face the bankruptcy court, negotiate the sale agreement and the conveyance docs and do all the diligence, but now there was also frankly, a partnership agreement that needed to be negotiated among the purchasers. Luckily, all of the organizations here were so committed to the goal that they all, really just kind of worked together to get it done. So So we got through the legal issues. We arrived at the auction, which resumed on Wednesday morning at noon in Chicago. This handwritten note was the winning bid for the auction, and it's on a piece of paper. This is my writing. So I wrote the winning bid. It was signed by my client, who's the general counsel of the J. Paul Getty Trust. And it shows that the co-purchasers, the J. Paul Getty Trust, the Ford Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, and the Mellon Foundation were bidding $30 million to acquire the archive. We won the auction. That was on Wednesday. Now, as those of you who are familiar with bankruptcy law know, winning the auction is not the end of the process. After you win the auction, you've actually got to go, and the bankruptcy court has to approve the sale order. So we won the auction on Wednesday. The first thing I did, we had a lot of work to do still in terms of negotiating the documents. First thing I did was I asked the bankruptcy trustee to take me out to actually do a physical inspection of the archive, and I've got some photographs that I took from that I'd like to share at the end. But I went out to visit the archive, came back, to the hotel and continued working, negotiate the documents. We went Friday to the hearing, and our clients were awarded. The sale order was approved, and our clients were received the archive. So it was a very and the courtroom and the hearing room, it was packed. There was overflow. There was this amazing energy because for so long, this company and these publications had been an important part of the Chicago community. So you had former employees who had worked for the company. You had photographers. You had people in the family. You had, really a strong cross section of the Chicago and Black communities who wanted to see how this next chapter would begin. So the sale order was approved. I want to show some of the images. I want to share some of the images that I saw when I went to go do the visual inspection. Before I do, I want to make kind of 2 points before I get to that, and then we can open up for some Q&A. First thing I want to talk about a little bit is the Getty Museum. Many of you know, the Getty is the world's largest and richest art institution. It's in the business of preserving, antiquities and really, our cultural heritage. When you go to the Getty website, when you look at their mission and purpose, they say, we inspire human understanding through visual art and cultural heritage. The Getty's dedicated to the preservation, conservation, and interpretation of the world's artistic legacy. This is, some of you have seen this sculpture at the museum, but this is a bronze sculpture. It's called Statue of Victorious Youth. It's estimated to be from about 300 to 100 BC. This is an illuminated manuscript from 1561. This is a manuscript depicting the creation of the world from the year 1170. The Getty is focused on acquiring and preserving priceless evidence, artifacts of our humanity, of our cultural heritage. And so it really struck me, and it still strikes me, and I'm still in awe, that the same way that the Getty thinks that it's important to preserve these 1,002, millennial artifacts and pieces of art, it thinks about the Johnson Publishing Company photography archive in the same way. It recognizes that this is priceless and invaluable, evidence of our cultural heritage, and it needs to be preserved for generations to come. And that, with its partners, the other foundations, and with the Smithsonian, that's what it's committed to. So that's something that really struck me. Let's take a look at what I saw when I went out to visit the archive, and then we can maybe do some Q&A. So like I said, when we won as soon as we won the auction, this was before we had closed and had the sale order approved. But when we won the auction, first thing I did is I went with the bankruptcy trustee. This is the bankruptcy trustee. And she and I drove out. It was about 30 minutes outside of downtown Chicago, very nondescript, kind of unimpressive, 6-story brick building in the south side of Chicago where the photography archive was housed. So you go in, and you go up to the sixth floor, and this is what you see. It's a ginormous room of these bookshelves with these boxes. The first thing I noticed, I'll tell you, hopefully you could see it in this image. First thing I noticed was how close the sprinkler system was coming to the top of the boxes. So one of the first things we did is we had somebody go out and buy a bunch of plastic tarps from like Home Depot and come and cover everything. So, but you see literally, 2,000 of these boxes, and so then you open the box and there's these folders and they take your breath away. These images, the majority of them are black and white or sepia tone. And what I saw, the images I saw, they just not only capture the subject who's in the image, but the way that they capture the facial expression and the body language really, powerfully conveys emotion and feeling, what was going on with that person, what was going on in our community, what was going on in the country. When we got off the elevator, I saw the docent, the woman who maintains the photography archive, and she asked, was there anyone in particular who I wanted to see? And I said, look, I'd love to see some images of the Jackson 5. So she went to go get that box. And she said, put these gloves on, but feel free to take a look. So I looked around, and again, here's the images I saw. And again, 4.5 million images, less than 1 million have really been seen by the public. Love this one of Marvin Gaye. This is when Cassius Clay became Muhammad Ali. Love this one of James Brown. And then, aside from the very, kind of public images, there were a lot of folders that captured people in more private and intimate settings. And so I was particularly struck by these next two images of Billie Holiday, and you can see her here. And then I don't know, hopefully you can see here if you're looking on the screen, but this is just her in her hotel room. And I looked at her forearms in this, and it looks like a bunch of mosquito bites. And those obviously they're not mosquito bites. Those are tracks from using heroin. And so it just the intimacy that the photographers were able to capture these images. I'm waiting in the room for the woman to return with a box of photographs of the Jackson 5, and I see a box on the corner on the floor, and the box says Malcolm X. So I get really excited because I'd love to see images of Malcolm X. So I grab the box, I've got my gloves on, I open it up, and I was expecting to see photographs of Malcolm X. What I saw instead was this note. It says Mr. Adams. Mr. Adams was the name of a publisher at the time at the Johnson Publishing Company. The note reads, Mr. Adams, I regret the poor quality of these photos. I took them myself with Tri-X, but had no light meter, so I had to guess the lighting on each one. In this box was not images of Malcolm X. In this box were photographs that Malcolm X himself had taken of black men in Chicago who had been beaten, shot, and killed by Chicago police. And I start flipping through, and these are the images. A picture of men, and you can see the scars on their heads where they've been beaten. A lot of pictures at the coroner's office after autopsies had been performed on men who had been killed. You can see on this image the bullet wound where the bullet entered the skull. And then on the back of the images, Malcolm X, again in his hand, described what had happened. Clarence Jingles, age 21, shot through pelvis and hip. Arthur Coleman, age 27, shot through the chest, quarter-inch above the heart, and also shot through penis and stomach. And Monroe Jones, age 21, shot through left shoulder. Monroe Jones, 21, shot through left shoulder, beaten and stomped by police. was one of the two Muslims originally stopped by police and questioned concerning some clothes he was taking from his car. Both worked for the dry cleaners. And as I'm, you know, and you look, and not only does he kind of describe who the victim is and what happened, but there's dates on the back of these photographs. And these are photographs from 1962, 1963, 1964. And what struck me and overwhelmed me, frankly, looking at these images was candidly, you know, how little progress we've made on this front, and how these are pictures that could have been taken last week or last year in Chicago or in Los Angeles or New York. And so it really, as exciting and as meaningful as the transaction was to be a part of and to help lead, seeing these images really brought to the forefront how important it is that the Getty and the Ford Foundation and the MacArthur Foundation and the Mellon Foundation and the Smithsonian are preserving this archive, protecting it, and making it available for all of us to see and continue to learn from. That really struck home. The last point I want to make is, and I'm sorry to, you know, it's a very serious note here, but the last point I want to make is this transaction happened, happened very quickly. There were a ton of moving pieces. It was probably the single most complex transaction that I have worked on as an attorney. And I want to be clear, I was supported by a tremendous team of my colleagues at Munger, Tolles, and Olson. And my partners and my colleagues dropped what they were working on to kind of advise me on intellectual property rights, help me understand the tax implications. My bankruptcy partner, flew to Chicago so that we can attend the hearing together, and he could guide that. So we had a tremendous team at Munger Tolles that really dropped everything to make sure that this would be executed for the client. It wasn't until about 24 hours in that it really struck me that, and it was kind of one of those oh shit moments, but 24 hours in, it really struck me that, like, oh shit, I'm actually leading this deal. This is, I've got a team of people who are kind of available and pitching in, but this is kind of my deal that I'm leading. And I got to tell you, at that moment, I did reflect on the training and the legal education that I received from this law school. And I reflected on what a privilege it was for me to have. These were my professors when I was at the evening division from 2004 to 2007. These are the amazingly talented, brilliant professors that I had the chance to learn from, and many of whom who have become friends. And it made me think, like, this is not a coincidence that someone with my background is here working on this deal. This is something that my legal education from Loyola has really prepared me for, and it's given me the confidence that this is a transaction that I can lead for a client. So that's the story about how we rescued the photography archive out of bankruptcy. It was a tremendous professional joy and privilege to be involved with it. I really do reflect and am thankful for the training and support that I've gotten from Loyola Law School, not just while I was there, but frankly, from the second I've left up until now. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to see if I can answer them.
George, thank you for that. Really incredibly moving and powerful presentation. And boy, I have so many questions. I really want nothing more than to sit down with you over a glass of nice wine and to kind of ask all of them. But this is not that moment. We will both look forward to that. We are starting to get questions in the queue, which I'll tee up. But let me take the moderator's prerogative and ask the first question, which is, and maybe I'll ask it, flip sides of the coin. You can answer whichever one you want. You get that call right? Which is in many ways a call that you as a person, you as a lawyer, all of us wait our whole lives for, right? And you have that dawning realization like, oh, wow, this is big. And granted, it takes a couple, like 24 hours for it to fully sink in, but you realize that you are the lawyer at that moment that's going to get to work on this big thing. What do you call Azita and tell her? Like, I mean, really, what's in your head at that point? And the flip side is, on the back end of this, a week after, you're talking with your daughter or your kids at the dinner table, hey, Dad, what have you been working on? How do you explain that? And I guess I'd ask you to kind of reflect on either one of those.
Yeah.
To really talk about the significance to you as a person of this.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I get, very thoughtful and emotional about it, because as someone growing up, who had family members who relied on these publications to validate their humanity in a way, right? Like, this was, I know it's not okay to say now, but this was like, it's before the Cosby Show, right? It's before kind of the Cosby Show introduced, Black families to the rest of America. I mean, Ebony Magazine is what our community had. And so as a person who grew up seeing how significant, it wasn't a magazine, but it's not just a magazine. It's kind of evidence of, as well as communication of, our humanity, our right to be here as Americans, our story. So from a personal level, it was really, and still is, very overwhelming. I'll tell you, to answer the first part of your question, when the call came in, to be clear, it wasn't clear to me really until the end of that first day, or kind of 24, 36 hours in, that like, okay, this is my deal and I'm running it. We started off like, hey, we're going to reach out to some other folks. We're going to see who's available. Hey, George, why don't you just like kind of start going through the stuff now and get your arms around it, and then we'll build a team around it. And then we found out, well, they're only going to move the auction until Wednesday. And that person's not available. So, okay, so why don't you do like, we're going to build a team still, but why don't you kind of and so it kind of sunk in slowly. And then the other piece though, Michael, is, and look, this is where I think the Loyola training, served me well. And the training I had at other places I've worked, but you just kind of fall into the deal mode, right? You drop a checklist and you say, okay, what do I know? What don't I know? Whose help am I going to need? How do we prioritize? And you just kind of start going through the deal.
Okay, thank you for that. We're getting a number of great questions, so I'll try to get through as many as I can. One question is, do you know when these are going to be exhibited, or what's going to happen with the quote, less important ones, end quote?
Yeah, great. Okay, great. Yeah, great question. So the co-purchasers, so these five, cultural philanthropic institutions, and again, that's significant also that they all they've never come together to do anything like this, right? This is what brought them together. So they are in the process now of working with a preservation team, a curatorial team. My understanding is that every image, and from this perspective, right, no such thing as an important image and not an important image, but every image will be, scanned, a high quality digital scan. A lot of the images you saw have data on the back, metadata that, with dates and information, that'll be captured. And then, digitized and organized and really made available for the public to view and see. You can imagine that that's not an easy process to go through 4.5 million images. And then the actual images themselves will be preserved. And there's still some question about, what's going to go to the Smithsonian Museum in DC. The Getty here in Los Angeles has an amazing preservation facility and capacity. So those conversations are ongoing, but really the goal is to make this available for as many people as possible to see and study for, scholarly purposes and other public purposes.
Let me just read you a couple comments. Wow, amazing, great work, keep it up. That from Victor, a guy that may or may not be the former dean of the law school and one of your former professors. From an alum, Ramona Wright. Thank you so much, George, for your efforts to preserve this important American and world history. I especially appreciate you highlighting the photos Malcolm X took. Bravo and congrats from one Loyola alum to another. One question that we're getting, how, and you kind of touched on this at the end, has this changed your career? If so, how?
That's fun. So, like you said in your introduction, I was trained as a transactional real estate attorney, and that is my primary practice. My personal passion is the art, and in particular supporting artists of color. My wife and I have been collectors for probably 6 or 7 years now, and that grew. It's grown out of a lot of things, but primarily it's grown out of wanting to support Black artists and other artists of color. So personally, my passion is around the arts. And through that passion, I've met a number of artists. I've developed relationships with people that work at museums. And then my law firm, Munger has a very world-renowned litigation practice that focuses on litigation involving art and cultural heritage. So to answer your question, how this has changed my career is my practice now is probably about 20% art transactions, and I represent other museums and art institutions. I represent collectors and artists. The only thing I don't do is I'm never adverse to an artist. I feel like artists typically get the short end of the stick on those negotiations, but it has both informed and I think helped me broaden my transactional art practice. So thanks for that, and that's been very exciting.
One question, was Linda Johnson Rice still involved with the business and the sale? What about the family of Moneta Sleet?
Yeah, okay, so Linda Johnson Rice was the daughter of John Harold Johnson. Once he retired, she became the president and CEO and ran a Johnson Publishing Company. I mentioned that at the time of the bankruptcy, the magazines, Ebony and Jet, had been sold off. So around 2000, I think it was 2016 or 2017, Johnson Publishing Company sold Ebony and Jet Magazine, those titles, to a private equity company based out of Texas. And I believe Linda Johnson Rice joined the board of that company and was involved with that. So the magazines were being published, one online and one physically published. At the time, after that happened, the Johnson Publishing Company still held the archive. And then there's a question about Moneta Sleet. So Moneta Sleet is probably the most famous photographer who was employed by Johnson Publishing Company. He took that photograph of Coretta Scott King at her late husband's funeral that is iconic and known throughout the world. So he was a photographer at Johnson Publishing Company.
Terrific, thank you. I'm looking through to see other questions. Did you ever get to the Jackson 5 pictures?
I did some amazing Jackson 5 pictures. I think obviously the Malcolm X pictures that he took are just kind of powerful and moving in a way that that bothers you based on frankly how little we've accomplished in those 6 decades. And so those were powerful, and I think there's an important message and story that needs to be told around those. Some of the other images I loved were, the photographers were present and captured the lunch counter sit-ins in the South during the Civil Rights Movement. Very powerful images there. Again, like many of which have never been seen. And so it really is an important historical and national treasure, and I'm so thrilled that the foundations have arranged to have it preserved.
Thank you, George. My colleague Susan Bakshian notes that apart from how students are going to be inspired by this, that in law we focus on how powerful words are, but photos are equally or even more powerful, and it's so important. Part of today's presentation is driving that home, and I also just think the role in which, as lawyers, we can be the change we want to see in the world and create positive change in lots of different ways, through traditional and non-traditional ways, I think is so important and such a moving part of this story. So I know we are going to start to lose people to class. So let me just kind of tie things up by thanking you for sharing this, for including your home, your legal community, Loyola, in this conversation. Really grateful to give us the time and space to talk about this. And I'm looking forward to that glass of wine very much. So thank you so much, George, for making the time for this.
My pleasure. Thanks for including me, and I really mean it. Like, I don't think this happened, or at least it didn't happen in the way with my involvement without the training, excellent legal training and education I got from the law school. So I remain indebted, and everybody enjoy the rest of Black History Month, and hope to see y'all soon.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we look forward to seeing you soon.